So I try to be an open book. And so my prayer was written a month ago, and I didn't take in consideration it being Memorial Day weekend. And the prayer request in that moment reminded me that I needed definitely to say something, so I tried to do it on the spot. I think our patriots deserve more than me doing it on the spot. And so I wanted to honor that and give space for not doing a good job in my prayer. So I think they deserve more. And I'm humble, and I just wanted to be clear about that. We got to keep it real, right? And I'm one of them, baby. So, the story today, sermon today. Now, see, I done got through the hard part. That was the children's thing, and now I can deliver what I come to deliver. Yeah, so I'll get started. On a British Airways flight from Johannesburg, a middle-aged, well-off white South African woman found herself sitting next to a black man. Being quite upset about this situation, she called for the cabin crew attendant to voice a complaint. "What seems to be the problem, madam?" asked the attendant. "Can't you see?" she says. "You've sat me next to a kafir." Kafir, I guess, is the equivalent to what we may know as the N-word. "I can't possibly sit next to this disgusting person. Find me another seat," the woman demanded. "Please calm down, madam," the flight attendant replies. "The flight is very full today, but I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll go and check to see if we have any seats available in club or first class." The woman passenger gives a snooty look at the outraged black man beside her, not to mention many of the surrounding passengers. A few minutes later, the flight attendant returns with the good news, which he delivers to the lady, who cannot help but look at the people around her with a smug and self-satisfied grin. "Madam, unfortunately, as I suspected, economy is full. I've spoken to the cabin service director, and club is also full. However, we do have one seat in first class." Before the lady has a chance to respond, the flight attendant continues. "It is most extraordinary to make this kind of upgrade. However, and I've had to get special permission from the captain, but given the circumstance, the captain felt that it is outrageous that someone be forced to sit next to such an unpleasant person." With that, she turns to the black man sitting next to the woman and says, "Sir, if you'd like to get your things, I have a seat ready for you in first class." At which point, the surrounding passengers stood up and gave a standing ovation while the black guy walked up to the front of the plane. Now, there are multiple lessons that one can derive from such a tale. To be honest with you, I grappled with the subject matter of the story. I thought of changing it and changing the characters to perhaps soften the implications. I ultimately chose to tell the story as it is. Surely most of us can empathize with the black man, as he is considered to be the non-person in this story, but I contend that despite the fact she was so outraged and entitled, she felt it proper to insult, demean, and wound another human being, we must also show sympathy toward the white woman. We must feel for her, because while she dehumanizes another, unable to see him as a loved and valued member of the human family, she also dehumanizes herself. This is not an isolated incident, of course. Our history is full of examples where humans dehumanized, devastated, denied, divided, and destroyed one another. From murder, wars, and plundering, crusades, slavery, and genocide, to race massacres, lynchings, and Jim Crow, to Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan, and Columbine, Newtown, the 9/11, and the list goes on and on and on. Has there ever been a time in our human history when humanity was not at war with itself? I submit to you that if we study the rationale behind many of the grievous and disastrous acts, if we look deeply into what throughout history and today has motivated some to commit atrocities, we will discover that people who do such things more often than not believe that what they are doing is right. Once they've convinced themselves that they are right, it then grows from there, merely stated positions into direct actions and behavior. Some dishonest politicians use this phenomenon when they weave narratives that scapegoat or blame ethnic or sexual minorities or present them as a threat and thus make them pay for the sins of another minority, the ruling class. No wonder there is so much polarization in the world. Nation against nation, tribe against tribe, black against white, religious against non-religious, and on and on and on. When people feel they have to sustain their worldview, philosophy, and ideology or theology, they often disconnect from the natural instincts of empathy and caring for one another. In order for their view of others, perhaps those like you and me, to exist and perpetuate, they have to continue telling a story about us. In other words, in order to justify their hostility, they belittle and dehumanize their ideological opponents. However, today's sermon is not about them, it's about us. Because we all do it. Woo. Took them a little long to say it, but they finally got there. We all do it. We too tend to perpetuate our narratives and hold on to the meanings we initially assign to people and events. Once we tell the story enough, we begin to believe in it ourselves. It becomes a part of who we are, our identity, how we show up in the world, and how we come to view others. How could we then possibly change the story that we've become? How could we open our eyes and recognize that what we've constructed, communicated, and assimilated may be just a story, a myth that has very little, if anything at all, to do with the objective reality? Speaking of ideological differences, one might have hoped that religion would rise up in the face of the calamities that such divisions produce, but in many instances, religion is the source driving much of the conflict. Although I should resist resorting to dichotomies, I must make the distinction here. Religion at its best calls us to elevate our knee-jerk reactions and turn them into responses that are ethical, just, and honorable, to transfigure our fears into compassion, our individual pain into selfless communal love, to transform us into people who seek harmony, radiate peace, and passionately work for the cause of justice. At its worst, religion propagates the herd mentality and tribalism, and even gives license to commit atrocities. It is pompous in its own rightness and self-righteousness. Speaking of religion in general, Karl Marx mused that, quote, "Religion is the sigh of the oppressed creature, the heart of a heartless world, and the soul of soulless conditions. It is the opium of the people," end quote. To Marx, religion is an otherworldly escape from the harsh realities of an unjust and oppressive world. And while the world is indeed often unjust and oppressive, I disagree with him in his assessment that all religion is innately escapist. I, and perhaps you, choose a religion that is firmly rooted in reality and one that seeks actively to transform the world, to become more just and equitable. You see, good religion requires continual work on self, unending search for enlightenment, ceaseless self-evaluation, faith, hope, and love. It can be helped by a loving, accepting community and by earnest and trustworthy members of the cloth. Nevertheless, it is hard labor, and no one can do it for us. Is it any wonder that bad religion abounds? Hateful, willful ignorance are indeed easier. Just need to turn on the news to see that. I often ask myself, how can committed Christians stand by the many evil deeds done in their name and with their seal of approval, like separating children from their parents at the border? How could well-meaning religious folk be willing to prevent millions from receiving health care? You started that, I like that. I even heard one preacher who said that it was fine if the current president nuked another country. And another one or two called for violence against LGBTQ folks and immigrants. One only needs to Google the term violence and religion together to learn how intolerant, violent, and downright nasty human beings can occasionally become. In John chapter 16:2 of the New Testament, it says, in fact, that a time was coming when people would kill you, believing they were doing God's service. The wise words from the late Charlie Chaplin addressed this when he said, we think too much and feel too little. More than machinery, we need humanity. More than cleverness, we need kindness and gentleness. Without these qualities, life will be violent and all will be lost, end quote. And although it is easy to pass judgment on these outliers in society, we must remember that the desire to be right is a universal human trait. The phrase, I told you so, is at once one of the most hated to hear and one of the most difficult to resist from saying. We are neurologically addicted to the chemicals our brains release when we feel right. When our views are justified and our grievances avenged, we delight in being right. The value we place on our rightness is phenomenal. We wear it as if it were a badge of honor. But in all frankness, no one else cares about our rightness because they are preoccupied with their own. And herein lies the problem. Because being right in our own eyes is a huge internal motivator that guides us in how we relate to others. Our communication often breaks when our values are misaligned. We talk past one another. Driven by our seemingly unquenchable desire to be right, we humans are prepared to lose longtime friends, disown family members, and wage figurative and literal wars. We bring suffering on others and on ourselves as a result. As a minister who has counseled countless broken families and the incarcerated, I do know what I'm talking about. But I'm here to tell you that despite our physiological addiction to being right, which is not unlike any other addiction, freedom is possible. And the first step toward freedom is being aware of and owning up to our need to be right and the stories we tell ourselves as a result. We in this movement are encouraged to take the responsibility of engaging others beyond the tenets of our own faith. Our effectiveness lies in our ability to listen and to learn and to reinvent ourselves. We have often taken the first step in allowing ourselves to be in conversation with those different from us. And you deserve a hand clap. Yes, you do. And no, it doesn't seem like that's what's going on in the world around us. While we see the decline of civility and people becoming insensitive, uncaring, and downright mean, we must not become hopeless. The examples of Jesus, Gandhi, and Dr. King, and many others, along with their messages of inclusion and equality, show us there is hope even in the darkest of times. Sometimes all it takes is a conscious choice. When we choose love, peace, and hope, when we plant a small seed in our souls and then let it grow by tending to it. Although small, the seed has an incredible potential, like our lives, to grow, piercing through the darkness of the soul in its reach and warmth and brightness of the sun. in its reach for the warmth and brightness of the sun. We cultivate it by upgrading and elevating our emotions and by renewing and rewriting our stories about ourselves and others, transforming our lives completely, and not only our lives, but also the lives of the people around us. It starts with a conscious choice and grows from there. Sometimes we just need to take a breath and ask ourselves, what is more important, being right or being in relationship? Being alone in my rightness or being in community? Being in conflict or being at peace? If people were to practice this little exercise, in many cases, it would become obvious that the benefit of our rightness is far outweighed by the heavy cost of damaging valued relationships, by conflict in our community, or a nation at war. Now, there are some who do not care about relationships or community or peace. So what shall we do when we encounter these people? Yeah. Yes. I recall once standing in the recessional line, greeting attendees with the senior pastor after a Sunday service. There was a man, a visitor at the end of the line who wanted to speak to the senior ministers. Now, some of you would be surprised to learn what we ministers deal with in the recession line. First off, the man declared that he was a proud Republican and an avid Fox News watcher. He then went on to disparage those he believed re-elected the worst president in history, as he put it, which at that time was President Obama. He went further to boldly admit that Fox News was a racist news station. These are his words. They were just afraid of using the N-word, but he declared that in that moment that he was not. I'm not afraid. And as effortlessly as saying hello, he blurted out the N-word. Now, why he felt it was necessary to use such language in that particular moment, I really can't tell you. This gentleman would not make eye contact with me. He only engaged a Caucasian minister with whom I was sharing the line with. I remember feeling invisible, something that I have experienced many times throughout my life when people would make me disappear while doing or saying things that affected me and my culture. I began to feel tension in my body. I was starting to be affected negatively by this discourse. And I wondered if my being uncomfortable was actually his intent. I'm not sure what the senior minister felt, but I'm sure he felt uncomfortable as well. It didn't take long for me to realize that there was something truly emotionally or mentally wrong with this visitor. And that's not funny, it's just that it's a fact. And whatever he was saying, I should not take it personally. He was not seeking conversation with me, and I didn't care to entertain his racist mindset, as I feel we are not responsible for healing, honoring, or celebrating abusive behavior. Can I say that again? We are not responsible for healing, honoring, or celebrating abusive behavior. But perhaps there was something that I could learn from this encounter. And in the end, it proved, standing there, it was the perfect place for me. I was unsure how the senior minister was going to respond to the gentleman, but the senior minister seemed to choose his word carefully. He was quite direct, and with great wisdom, he stood his ground and brought calm to the tense situation. The minister told the gentleman something to this effect. It's okay for you to have a point of view. I respect that. But you need to seek another method of engagement if you care to be effective in sharing your view. The minister could have chosen to simply ignore the man's word, like I've seen so many others do in similar situations. While not validating the man's words, he acknowledged the man's right to have his opinion. He went on to say to him, I believe you care more about your ideology and your principles than you care about people. And there it was. I didn't need to respond to the man at that point. I don't know what the man took away from his conversation with the minister, but with those few words, the minister released me. See, I didn't have to respond to issues of race. We didn't need to do a course of multiculturalism in that moment. He needed only to state the obvious. The man cared more about what was going on in his head than he did about those that he shared the space with. You see, here's the gift of the story I told you earlier about the two on the plane. Most of you would probably recognize and say that the redemptive moment came when the black man was upgraded and made his way to the first class section. And you would be right. However, I feel that another triumphal and redemptive moment came when in unity and solidarity with the black man, the flight crew, the captain, and the passengers themselves stood up and applauded the decision of the airline that the airline took to care for the non-person. They, in that moment, resisted bigotry together. This incident united a diverse group of people. It was in this moment that an injustice done to one was an injustice done to all. And by their standing, they restored the black man's humanity and with that affirmed their own. Yes. Mm-hmm. You see, when the people stood up on the plane, it didn't matter however much their ideologies, their theologies, or their philosophies may have differed. In that moment, they were saying that they cared more about the person, about people, than about ideology. It is certain that had the people on the plane remained silent and unmoved by what they were witnessing, the story would have been very different. Now, we may never know why so many come to believe what they believe about the other. We may never know their journey. What caused the man in the line or the lady on the plane to act so detached and dismissive of toward others? The real question is, though, what journey have we taken that causes us to view humanity in the way that we do? That causes us to show up in the world the way we show up? Once I realized where the man was, I realized where I needed to be. Once I understood his place, I understood mine, and I bracket that. I began to imagine and to see the man in the line as someone's son, loved by his mother, his father. Perhaps he was someone's father, loved by a son, a daughter. And when I began to place value in him, his ideology, his political affiliation, the words he was saying didn't matter as much. In that moment, I chose to tell myself a story that lifted him. And in doing so, I made a choice to care more for the person rather than his opinion. But this was not just for him. This was also for my own emotional health and well-being. Amen? I had to rewrite my story about him. Making this man out to be a monster based on his actions would do more emotional harm to me than to him. When people lose their humanity through their actions, we must keep ours. Amen? That doesn't mean we should fully trust someone like him with our lives, but I can respect his life without honoring his actions. Yes. Yeah. Woo! Australian neurologist and psychiatrist and Holocaust survivor Viktor Frankl said, "Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In this space is our power to choose our responses. In our response lies our growth and our freedom," end quote. This is a challenge that lies before us all, to choose to adhere to a religion or a philosophy, if you will, that seeks to elevate our reactions toward considerate, honorable responses, to choose to affirm our humanity by defending the humanity of others, especially when those others are very different from us, and to choose to do the same with our dignity. Whenever possible, we must choose to seek peace and understanding, kindness and patience. But in every circumstance, we must choose to exhibit love. I want to conclude today with the words of Barack Obama, my hero, who said, "We cannot help but believe that the old hatreds shall someday pass, that the lines of tribe shall soon dissolve, that as the world grows smaller, our common humanity will reveal itself. May it be so. Amen."